Welcome everyone. Today we are going to introduce you Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, third edition brief report. So here's our plan for this presentation. My name is Eva and I will be talking about basic test information. Then Paige will discuss the norm group. The third part of our presentation, Reina will explain how it would be used in the classroom. And finally, Whitney will talk about critique of test. The full name of our test is Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, third edition brief report, and the abbreviation is KTEA-3 brief. The authors are Dr. Alan S. Kaufman and his wife Nadine L. Kaufman. The test was published by Pearson in November 2015. The type of test is norm, reference, and error analysis. And the purpose of the test is screening, pre-referral, progress monitoring, and retesting. The test was intended for 4 to 25 years old or from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. The content areas that our test measure are reading, mathematics, and written expression. I try to do it visually to represent that red is for reading, green is for mathematics, and blue is for written expression. So there are two composites, brief achievement composites and academic skill battery composites. There are each composite has subtests for each area. There is letter and word recognition, mathematic computation, and spelling in brief achievement composite. And in academic skill battery, there are reading comprehension, math concepts and application, and written expression. The test is individually administered using paper and pencil. And approximate administration time is around 20 minutes for younger kids from pre-kindergarten through grade 3, and about 45 minutes for grades 4 to 12 plus. And here are types of score. So first of all, there's comparison to age or grade level. We can see a score summary table where we can see each composite, such as brief achievement, and there are 3 subtests: letter, word, and recognition, math composition, and spelling, and also academic skills battery with math concepts and application, letter and word recognition, and written expression, and math computation, spelling, and reading comprehension. So all these combined, or we can see it separately. We can see here standard scores, the sum of the standard scores and graph scores. Also the confidence interval, percentile rank, descriptive category, whether it's average or below or perhaps above the average, and grade equivalent. In this case, grade equivalent, it can be also age equivalent, and growth scale value. Then we can see score summary profile, and there is a bell curve graph, so we can see visually whether our student is in average, below average, or above average level. Also, we can see an analysis, and there are comparison to other students or people in this age, and and separately comparison. Here we can see all the subtests and differences. Here, and now Paige will speak about the norm group.
Hello, everyone. So just as Eva described a little bit earlier, they separated these into two different samples, a grade sample that consisted of about 2,600 examinees, and then an age sample that consisted of 2,050 examinees. In both the grade sample and the age sample, half was administered Form A of this test and Form B of the test. Next, we have reliability, and reliability was assessed using three different methods. So internal consistency, which we know is the extent to which the test items correlate with one another. And they use the split half method to address this, which is basically dividing the test into two separate tests. Usually they'll use the odd numbers and the even numbers and then compare those to get an estimate of reliability. And in this case, those coefficients were pretty high, which indicates pretty good internal consistency. One thing that did stick out was the oral fluency was pretty low, and it was in the 0.70s. Even though this is low, the reliability for this composite is actually stronger at the younger ages, just because it's one of those prerequisite skills that show up pretty early in those literacy skills. The second method used to assess the reliability was alternative form, which they compared Form A to Form B. The test authors confirmed that this was an appropriate way to measure the same academic abilities. When they did this, the correlations range from 0.69 to 0.996. And again, we want that number to be as close to 1 as possible to indicate a pretty high reliability. So at the subtest level, it was from 0.5 to 0.9, which still indicates pretty high reliability. The last method they used to address the reliability was the inter-rater reliability, which is basically a consistency among test scores. So they agree upon a percentage when scoring these tests. And for this case, the oral expression was 90% and the written expression was 95%. Again, these reliability coefficients were pretty high, as they're very close to 1. Overall, it suggests that there is very substantial criteria to compare scores when examinees are cross-referencing these. So overall, the assessment is reliable. When we talk about validity, we are looking at how well that this test matches the needs of the students that are taking it. So in this case, it was established to test content, response processes, and internal structures. So when we compare the subtest and composite scores together, we get a coefficient range of 0.7 to 0.8, which indicates average validity. Another aspect they used to compare the validity for this test was they took a number of cognitive ability measures and achievement measures and compared all of them with the KTEA-3. And as an example, it's listed here. The cognitive measures scored a little bit lower than the achievement measures, but overall, the validity was pretty good for this test. So again, it's also a valid assessment. So we hit both marks. Passing it off to our next group member.
All right, so hello everyone, my name is Raina, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how this test could be used by a classroom teacher. So one important thing to note is that in most cases, the general education classroom teacher probably would not be administering this test. It would most likely be administered by a special services teacher. And then they would need to work cooperatively with the classroom teacher in order to determine what supports a student, the student taking this test would need based on their scores. The KTEA-3 brief would be most useful in assessing abilities and developing supports for students in the areas of reading and literacy and math, both of which are required areas of testing per the No Child Left Behind Act. And Of course, standards must be aligned with the state standards, so Common Core. And this test meets that requirement. So that is useful for classroom teachers. And then going back to what I was saying about it being used to develop supports, since this test deals with error analysis, it takes a look at specifically what children are struggling with within a content domain. So this test can be used to identify areas of need for students either suspected to have special needs, or students who are already identified as having special needs, what skills they specifically need to be taught more directly or explicitly. And then two things that I'll be looking at is implementing supports for core instruction, literacy and math, how this test can be used for writing SMART goals for an IEP, as well as assess the effectiveness of classroom curriculum. The best way that I was able to do this was by kind of creating an illustration of a hypothetical child. So let's say that the KTEA-3 brief was administered to 10-year-old Maddie the spring before her 5th grade year. She received a standard score of 83 on reading comprehension and fell within the 13th percentile. Her grade equivalent was that of a 3rd grader, despite the fact that she was entering the 5th grade. So in reviewing her case for the upcoming school year, the special services team, right following IEP for Maddie will respond to questions on fiction and nonfiction texts at a 4th grade reading level, both verbally and through writing, providing correct and appropriate answers 80% of the time. The reason why the 4th grade reading level was selected was so that Maddie is not challenged too far beyond what she's able to do currently, but so that she's also it's kind of like right within the range of challenge that she needs. And then to implement this, her teachers would work with her in using graphic organizers to take notes on things such as character, key events in a text, and questions that she may have regarding reading. These techniques can then be used both in the general education classroom, as well as if she's pulled out for groups with special services, or at home on homework, things like that. Go ahead to the next slide. So we're gonna keep Maddie's story going a little bit here. She also struggles with word problems. Now, this is where the KTEA-3 brief is especially useful because, as I mentioned before, it looks for error patterns. So since different error patterns and discrepancies call for different interventions, it's important to analyze everything rather than creating a very general statement such as Maddie struggles with reading, or she struggles with write, or struggles with math. So if we look at her composite score in math, it was actually average, but when looking at the subsets of categories, it was evident that she made the most errors in the category of word problems. This would make sense since she struggles with reading comprehension. It's probably hard for her to make sense of everything that's going on within a math word problem. So in discovering this, Maddie's classroom teacher could implement the use of tactile and virtual manipulatives for all lessons dealing with word problems and algebra foundations. Since algebra problems typically turn into word problems at some point. So Maddie can then use these same manipulatives when she works with a special services teacher, has a set that she can bring home for completing homework. Now, what this means for lesson planning and curriculum application is the teacher is changing her lesson plan to better suit the needs of the student. And let's say at the end of the school year, Maddie moves from the 25th percentile to the 50th percentile for her score for her math composite, and is able to work on some word problems without even using manipulatives. In seeing this, her teacher can decide to take the approach that she used this year with Maddie specifically and apply it to the curriculum as a whole since it works so well, and use this going forward with students who may be struggling in similar manners. So these are just a couple of applications that could be used from a classroom teacher. I'm gonna pass it off now to Whitney, who will be discussing the critique of this test.
Hi everybody, so I'll be talking about the critique of the test that we are presenting today. So the tests, the subtests and composites were reported through 8 different core subtests that focused on reading, math, reading, written, and oral language, which the oral language is a new composite that was added. As I was like looking through this, the oral language one was actually quite low for scores for data on it, but I assume that was because it's new and they still are collecting data with it. Whereas reading and math and written writing or writing language were all higher and closer to that 1%. And I also looked at different stuff for validity with different researchers as well, and it is a valid test to be used within both the general education classroom as well as within like special education as well with students. However, there are low numbers that can affect the data that's being collected too, so that could play in the part of whether or not how valid the test can be depending on the scores that are gathered on the students with the tests that are being done with the areas that it's focusing on.
All right, this concludes our presentation on the KTEA 3 brief.